Being 4:30, this meeting of the Water Quality Management Committee of March 5th is in order. The first item of business is Amy Lowell, who's going to speak about the status of her warrant article for the T-ticket sewer phase.
Thank you. So Article 15 on this coming town meeting is construction funding for Great Pond Phase 1 sewer project. This group probably doesn't need the reminder, but just as background, this is the first phase of a project to improve water quality in Great Pond as outlined in the town's targeted watershed management plan that was approved in 2023. $3.8 million of design funds were approved in November of 2023 by a town meeting, and the design is now 90% or so complete. As a reminder, this figure shows the service area, which outlined in red, and there will be two lift stations in this project, one at the north end of what people have been calling the Augusta parcel, and another one within the Falmouth Port development. The lift station at the Augusta parcel will pump wastewater up that what's shown as a yellow and black dashed line, which is force mains, pressure pipe from that location up to the wastewater treatment plant for treatment, and it'll be discharged up there at the treatment facility. The funding request is $60 million for this construction project. The project is on the 2025 state revolving fund list of funded projects. The maximum that they fund for any project is $50 million. So that's what the project is funded at for 2025. The town is expecting a 0% interest loan for this project and expecting 25% loan forgiveness through the Cape Cod and Islands Water Protection Fund. The town will seek a second state revolving fund loan in 2026 for the remaining SRF eligible costs. Any portion of the project cost that's not covered by the SRF loan will be borrowed by the town at market rates. This table shows how we get to the, if you round, $60 million cost of the project. It's actually two construction contracts. One for the collection system, which is the pipes in the roads to which each property connects, the gravity pipes and the low pressure pipes. The second construction contract is construction of the lift stations and the force mains. Grinder pumps, the purchase of the grinder pumps for the property owners who will have them. Grinder pump subsidies. I've assumed for this cost estimate that the subsidy will be the same this time as it was previously, $1,800 per property, and that's because though there's escalation in costs, the costs for both gravity and low pressure have both increased, and it's a generous reimbursement. So that's my proposal, is that the reimbursement would be the same approximately as it was last time. Engineering services during construction, so you have the design ahead of time, which has already been funded, but you have resident observation of the project, and you have the engineers responding to requests for information and proposed change orders and all that, so there's engineering services costs during construction. There are also significant police details because there's a lot of work in town in roads. And there's an allowance for utilities, fiscal, and legal costs for a total capital cost estimate of about $52 million. At this point in the project, it is very appropriate and prudent to include a contingency. We have not bid these contracts yet, assuming that that the project is funded at town meeting and then again at the ballot. We plan to go out to bid this summer. But until you have the bids and have a couple of these other factors outlined, it makes sense to include 15% contingency. I was going to talk a bit about betterments. The select board is going to discuss the cost allocation for the betterment this evening at a meeting at 7 o'clock. So we do want to continue with Steve Rafferty's precedent of ending the meeting by 6:30, because the select board will be in here at, and there's a select board member there. The select board will be meeting in here at 7, and they will be discussing the cost allocation between the betterments and the town. And so that portion, their recommendation on that betterment split will be included in the recommendation on Article 15. So Article 15 will both be recommendation by the Finance Committee of the funding of the project, and the select board will vote on the betterment split. At a future meeting, the select board will determine the method of betterment assessment. I'm assuming it will be sewer equivalent units versus frontage method. And then they'd also vote on how SEUs or sewer equivalent units would be assigned to different properties. That is not happening tonight. That is something that will happen at a future date. After the construction project bids are opened, the select board will have another meeting at which they determine the maximum betterment amount based on the total service area specific project cost and the total number of sewer equivalent units in the area. The final betterment amount will be determined based on actual final project cost after the project is complete, but cannot be higher than the amount that will be voted by the select board at their hearing. Based on a rough estimate of what costs would be covered under the betterment and a preliminary estimate of the number of sewer equivalent units, the preliminary estimate of the betterment cost per SEU is, right now, it's in the range of $40,000. That is a higher number than we've talked about before. Well, first I should say, at 0% interest over 30 years, that would be about $1,300 per year. That's a higher number than we've talked about in the past, and there will be a lot more discussion about what goes into that betterment. But you can, everybody is familiar with the fact that construction costs have escalated dramatically over the last 10 years since the last project since the betterment was assessed on the last project. And this sewer area has fewer properties than the Little Pond sewer area, project did, and there are also fewer. The lots are in general larger in this Great Pond Phase 1 area than they were in the last project. Again, this is a very preliminary estimate. The actual betterment amounts will be determined through the betterment process, which I just outlined on the previous slide, which the select board is responsible for. But I did want to get out that number here because it is a different number from the betterments on previous projects. The Falmouth Effluent Discharge Plan. So the discharge flow from the Great Pond Phase 1 sewer area will go to the existing discharge beds under our existing groundwater discharge permit, starting in the fall of 2027. And I'll talk about that more in a little bit in the next slides. The town is also planning to construct an outfall into the sound for all treated wastewater discharge. When the outfall is available, which is projected by the end of 2032, the town plans to cease land-based discharge, i.e. cease our regular discharge to open sand beds 1 through 15 at the main wastewater treatment facility. So that's the overall discharge plan for the next 7 years. A little bit more on how we get to the current discharge plan. So the Department of Environmental Protection permitting process for groundwater discharge permitting of new or increased discharge has become more difficult and time-consuming. Also, we have been very conservative in our discharge planning. We've been, in our discharge planning, preserving a significant buffer for future redevelopment within existing and proposed sewer areas for the more than 20-year time frame. We've also been using engineering design flows for discharge planning, including a 20% factor for future infiltration and inflow. These conservative assumptions are wise for a lot of reasons, but the town is not planning to continue groundwater discharge for the next 20 years. We are only planning to continue groundwater discharge until the outfall is available, which again, we're expecting by 2032. Groundwater discharge from the Great Pond Phase 1 area is really only expected for 5 years. And even within that 5 years, the first at least 2 years would be a ramping up of flow as people connect to the sewer system. Importantly, there is sufficient capacity under our existing groundwater discharge permit to accommodate the existing and the permitted flows and the planned flows from Great Pond Phase 1. For all of these reasons, we rescinded the application that we had submitted for a modified groundwater discharge permit and the associated hydrogeological report. And instead, we plan to accommodate the Great Pond Phase 1 flows under the town's existing groundwater discharge permit. An important note here, if the town were to be unsuccessful in permitting an outfall, the town does plan to expand or develop groundwater discharge sites beyond the existing beds 1 through 15. And the town is in fact has been reserving sites in town for that potential circumstance. Obviously, that is not the desired route. We do not plan to go with groundwater discharge in the future. However, the town does plan to go back to those options and is keeping those options open in case the outfall is unavailable. So this is the numbers to show what I was just talking about. The permitted flow, which is the total effluent discharge allowed under the town's existing groundwater discharge permit, is 710,000 gallons per day. The existing flow, meaning the effluent flow from the main plant in 2024, was 489,000 gallons per day, leaving a difference of 211,000 gallons per day. And in fact, the existing flow, that $489,000 number, that's a higher number than the average. The average over the past 5 years has been 450,000 gallons a day. So this is a conservative number to use in this calculation. The anticipated flow from redevelopment projects that have been permitted by the town but not yet constructed is about 25,000 gallons. What I'm talking about there is Liberty Green, for example, that is being constructed here on Main Street, but for which obviously the flow hasn't come yet. The development on Scranton and Main Street, 763 Main Street and 2024 Scranton, that project is complete now, but we didn't have flows from that project in 2024. So I've looked at the list of projects that have been permitted and that we expect flow from, and I'm including a factor of 25,000 gallons per day for those. The Great Pond Phase 1 flow, without the factors for infiltration and inflow, which we don't expect for 15, 20, 30 years, and without additional redevelopment factors for future growth within that area, is actually 110,000 gallons a day. What we'd been talking about previously requesting under our groundwater discharge permit modification was 200,000 gallons per day. And that was, again, a very conservative number, allowing for redevelopment within the existing service area, within this future service area, and using an engineering design factor for infiltration and inflow. So that total additional anticipated flow through these projects and through the Great Pond Phase 1 project is 135,000 gallons per day. So the remainder, which would be the allowance, what's left for redevelopment from now through the outfall availability, is another 86,000 gallons per day. So the project schedule. April 2025, coming right up, is Article 15 is on the town meeting warrant for appropriation for construction funds. In May of this year, there will be a ballot vote on the project. In the summer, assuming those first two votes are positive, we will bid the construction projects. The construction would begin in the fall of this year, and it's a 2-year construction window for the two projects. So we'd expect them to be done in the fall of 2027, and so that's when connections to the sewer would begin. And the septic nitrogen load to Great Pond would begin to go down as connections get made. By the end of 2032, we're projecting the outfall will be available, and again, that regular discharge to sand beds 1 through 15 at the main plant would cease. And I have here as the last bullet that implementation of next phases of sewering would follow. There is some discussion that we can have further down the road of how much planning for that we could do ahead of time so that additional sewering might coincide with the availability of the outfall, but I'm not ready to talk about that now. At this point, additional discharge is waiting for either an outfall, which is the primary plan, or additional discharge beds. And that's it.
Thank you, Amy. Very clear. Any questions from the committee? Ken?
Yeah, you may have said this at the beginning, so the number of SEUs is?
So again, we don't know. That is to be determined. We will evaluate it in detail, and the select board will have a meeting at which they review a policy about how the SEUs are going to be distributed. So, for example, a single-family home would be one SEU, but commercial developments, multifamily developments, other, those two would be assigned multiple SEUs based on criteria that the select board will determine. The estimate of SEUs to come up with that $40,000 number is 820 SEUs. Again, that is a preliminary estimate for the purposes of getting a preliminary.
Okay, because when I divided 60 million by 40,000, I got 1,500.
Right, so not all of the project cost would be included under the betterment, right? So
Okay.
again, I don't want to
That's
get
my
into
second
too many details here tonight because it's not the Water Quality Committee that's going to vote this, and the select board isn't going to vote this for a while. They're just talking about the betterment split, this 70-30 distribution tonight. There will be future meetings where they talk about SEUs, and then where they talk about the total project cost and the betterment numbers. So you look at a total project cost, and some of that total project cost is appropriate to be included under the betterment, and then it's going to be split 70-30, and then you divide that by the number of SEUs. There's a lot of uncertainty still in those numbers.
Gotcha. Yeah, okay, good. That's why everything didn't add up.
Ed?
Do you have a count of the single-family residences that are in the area, just the number of single-family houses that'll be connecting, roughly?
So I don't have exactly that. So there are 600 properties in the area. There are 800 units, I would say. So of the 600 properties, one of them, for example, is Falmouth Port. Falmouth Port has more than 200 condo units. No, I guess I don't have a number for single-family residential. It's most of it. The overwhelming majority of the properties in here are either single-family or condos.
Thank you. Well done, as always.
Thank you.
John?
I'm set.
I'm just going down the road.
Yeah. Amy, this projects, I should say, have flown under several different names over the past 5 or 10 years. Is it now officially Great Pond Phase 1 and 2?
I apologize for the evolution of names. I personally found it, so T-Ticket Acapesket, or TASA, T-Ticket Acapesket sewer project was the TASA acronym.
Right.
My problem with that was that if I continue to use it, it sounds like we're sewering Acapasket right now, and we're not. That's phase 2. So the other thing is that the Great Pond title refers back to the goal of the project, which is to improve water quality in Great Pond. The other thing is that Mara Vista wasn't in that title, and this involves some additional sewering in Mara Vista. So that is why I have gotten away from the TASA title, and I use the Great Pond Phase 1.
Very logical.
Amy, I think you listened in on the call last week where there was a change by the Mass DEP regarding the SRF funding for the IUPs, and they talked about no longer funding multi-year projects, and you'd have to reapply after year 1.
Yep.
And a lot of the towns seem to be really concerned about that in terms of not having guaranteed funding, and some of the towns were talking about completely stopping their sewering plans. Has that factored at all into where we're going with this? Are we waiting for greater clarity on that, or we're going to pull ahead and move ahead regardless?
So the select board sent a letter to the DEP, in a comment letter on that the DEP's change in their policy on how they're handling the SRF loans. So Falmouth Select Board voted on that and sent a letter by the deadline, which was this past Monday, expressing significant concern about those changes to the SRF program. It is not a threat, an immediate threat for this current project, because the overwhelming majority of the project is covered under the $50 million loan, and the town's plan will be to apply for a loan in 2026 for the remainder of the eligible project costs, which is a small portion of the project cost. The reason for concern is that it creates more uncertainty about project funding in the future and its availability and how it's going to work for the future. So the board wrote a strongly worded letter about its concern about this funding for the future. There, as you allude, there was a hearing. The DP held a hearing about this process last Monday, and there were a lot of concerns expressed by the county, so these same rule changes applied to both drinking water and clean water, is what they call the wastewater program. So there are a lot of folks that are expressing concern about it. The main change, the two main things are there's a cap of $50 million per project each year. And in addition, the big change as far as I'm concerned is that in the past, if your project was on the SRF funding list 1 year, if it was selected to be funded, then any project cost that weren't covered under that initial loan were automatically provided in future years. And now you have to reapply each year. So if you had a $100 million project and you were funded at $50 million 1 year, in the past you knew that that extra $50 million would be available in future years. Now with the change, you have to reapply for the rest of that project funding. So it raised concern about the reliability of funding in the future. It is appropriate for the town to express that concern, but it is not an immediate, it's not going to affect this current project.
Thank you. We have a lot of material to cover tonight. I might ask for questions from the audience, but I don't want to hear sermons about anything. If there's a succinct, specific question, if you disobey what I'm saying, you will be losing your time on all the other questions tonight. So any questions from the audience? Okay. The next item is, I thought you didn't.
Well, I guess it seems like censorship that you're limiting what people can talk about and what questions they can ask. I will say that this is premature going to Article 15 for town meeting. We haven't had the mandatory public hearings for those two force main stations. I think the butters around those force main stations would like to voice their concerns. Is their public right here in Massachusetts? We have 6 weeks to town meeting. The proper butter notification is 2 weeks before those plans have to be have to be in the DPW, and then you have to have public hearings, and in 6 weeks, that's not gonna get done. So I don't see Article 15 actually legally going to a town meeting. So I'll bring this up with the Board of Selectmen, but that's a great oversight. We've been trying to get the sewer project done for 4 years. And to overlook the butters' rights to know what the construction project's gonna be next to their home, how it's gonna affect their property values, and then to have numbers and not know how many, units. For 4 years, you don't know how many units are in this project and what the subsidy is gonna be. All these details should have been hashed out 4 years ago, ready for town meeting 4 years ago, and that's why it got shot down by town meeting 4 years ago. Here we are again, remixing it, and I don't see it passing, and it legally can't go. So I'll keep it brief.
Thank you.
Ask Amy if she wants.
Do you want to respond to that, Amy? Or you want to wait for the select board meeting or some other meeting? Okay. The next item is John Kaufman, and the status of the marine borings.
All right, this will be a brief presentation. It's really just an update on what's going on with the marine borings project that's part of the overall Falmouth, outfall pipe, marine outfall pipe. And it's one of those critical steps that has to be done in order to get to the permitting phase. And really what we're trying to achieve here, and let me advance. What we're trying to achieve is to collect a series of boreholes, or take a series of boreholes that are gonna run along the pathway of the proposed outfall pipe. And the main elements we're trying to do here is to capture subsurface soil samples that we could do various laboratory and in situ tests on to better design the pipe that's gonna be drilled, the horizontal directional drilling pipe that's gonna be drilled to put the actual outfall pipe into the subsurface below Vineyard Sound. And so GHD has been contracted. They're gonna be taking 7 total boreholes, 6 are gonna be offshore, and 1 will be onshore at Kite Park, and the map over there shows the details of that. They're gonna run out of approximately 2,800 feet and into about 24 feet of water depth at the most distal location. And what happens with the, I'm sure many of you have seen the barge that's parked offshore at Kite Park now. There's a truck-mounted drilling rig, and it's gonna take boreholes at these pre-assigned areas, 100 feet deep, 6 inches diameter, and they're gonna collect samples of the soil, the subsurface soil. They're gonna characterize it geologically and run a whole bunch of tests on it to get the sort of the geomechanical properties that will then inform the engineers on how to design the outfall pipe. So it's a really critical phase. Unfortunately, it looks like they were supposed to start drilling today, was the latest information I got, but as I drove out here, it looks like they haven't started. I think they're having some issues, mechanical issues with the drill pipe, and they still haven't sorted that out yet. So what was originally supposed to be a late March completion of the project may be pushed back a little because of the start date. But when it does happen, it's gonna collect lots of really valuable data. And just a few pictures to show what this looks like right now, if you haven't seen it. This is a view to the southwest, the lower left picture, showing this is a jack-up barge ridge. It's got the 3 tall legs that the main hull sits on. There's a truck-mounted rig on it, and you can see it in the lower right picture. And that actually contains the drilling assembly, and they drill these holes. They take various sorts of in-situ tests. They're called standard penetration tests, where they hammer into the subsurface soil and measure the number of strokes it takes to go 12 inches, and that correlates to various parameters in the actual soil samples. So it's really critical to have this information. They'll collect core samples, they'll bring it back to the laboratory, analyze it, and again, that'll be used by the engineers to design the outfall pipe. Just a close-up look at the barge itself. You can see, I think you can see the truck there. It backs up onto the floor of the barge. And then all the drilling is done right from that truck. All the samples are collected there. Any waste is put into 55-gallon drums and taken ashore. Nothing's dumped overboard. So it's a really a clean operation, and it's a standard type of operation that occurs when we do these sorts of geotechnical studies. So no issues there. And then finally, just some of the tests that'll be done. You can see in this example, this is called the standard penetration test, and a big anvil is hammered into the soil. They measure the number of strokes it takes to go a certain distance. Typically, it's done on 6-inch increments, and the table there shows the correlations that, based on how quickly the material is hammered into, that correlates to various properties of shear stress, compression stress, tells you something about the grain size, how moist the soil is, how wet it is, cohesive. So there's a lot of information. They collect samples, which is shown in the picture on the right, and they characterize that geologically. They take that back to the lab and run more tests, and at the end of all these analyses, they're in a much better position to design the correct type of pipe and drill hole that's going to be used to bring out the pipe into Vineyard Sound. So again, they haven't started drilling yet. Hopefully that's going to happen soon. But when it does happen, it takes about a month to do the 7 boreholes. And that's all I had for the overview.
Any questions from the committee on this? Why don't you go ahead to your second thing, because we're running late.
I think this is it. Good. Okay, so now I just wanted to give an update on the refundable tax credit. Most people here are aware of what's going on there. We're trying to change the Title V septic tax credit from refundable or non-refundable to refundable to make it more widely eligible to the population, especially the lower middle income folks. And I don't think I've shown this table previously, but this gives an example of what we're trying to achieve. And I do some very simple scenarios of a family with 2 children and married seniors. And I look at what the tax credit would look like if the income they have, the taxable income is $50,000 versus $150,000. And you can see that, you know, we're assuming an IA system cost of about $35,000. So under the current tax credit, which is non-refundable, that family with 2 children that has a taxable income of $50,000, they would get $1,960 per year, as opposed to the family that's making $150,000 of taxable income. They would get the maximum allowable per year, $4,000. So when you take that out in time, you can see that it makes a huge difference. The cost to the lower income family is you know, over $6,000 more compared to the family that has more money. So it seems to be backwards to what we'd really like to see. We want to make sure the families that are most in need of the support can take advantage of this credit. And the same issue is for married seniors. They also, you know, would not be able to collect the full amount of the credit if they only have taxable income of $50,000. Now, when you go to a refundable tax credit, everybody qualifies for $4,000 a year, and everybody gets equal treatment. So the lower middle income folks who don't have a lot of money owed to the state will still get that tax credit. So that's kind of the rationale for doing this. Now, where do we stand now? We met with Senator Dylan Fernandez back about a month ago, had a Zoom meeting with him and his staff, and he was very supportive of this concept. He really, you know, sees the merit in it, and I think it took a little bit of time for him to understand it, because at his town hall at the library, he thought the existing credit was great and would do what he wanted to do, but when we actually explained and showed him the tables, he fully understood that, no, yeah, there's a gap here, that we need to modify this. So he's you know, behind the refundable tax credit. He does have some questions about maybe putting income limitations on the eligibility, such that if you're making over some income cap, you would not qualify for this credit. It would be geared towards lower middle income folks. And he wants to keep it sort of revenue neutral to the Commonwealth, so that by cutting off the high-end income receivers of the tax credit, it could then be used to provide for the lower income, middle income folks, and remain revenue neutral to the Commonwealth. And he wants to keep the eligibility to homeowners whose principal residence is Massachusetts, so it wouldn't be available to people who use their homes as a vacation home or a rental property. So there are some issues that have to be worked out. He can provide, or Senator Fernandez can provide legal counsel to help draft a bill. This bill may be different than the bill that's already submitted, a placeholder bill by Representative Vieira for refundable tax credit. So they might have different concept of how this ultimately plays out, but that'll be brought together when they take it through to the legislative process. And we've been in contact with Fernandez's staff, providing information as he needs it to help in designing the wording of the bill. So that has gone extremely well. Thanks to Doug Brown, we have the select board letters of, basically letters of support for this concept have now been distributed to all the other Cape and Island towns' select boards. A package of information has been given to them, sort of a PowerPoint explaining the rationale for this refundable tax credit, and now the letters. And I think everybody seems to be on board with the concept that I've talked to. I just recently had a conversation with a fellow named Dave Bernstein. He's with Yarmouth and their Water Quality Committee, and he's also the president of the Cape Cod Seashore group. And he said he's been in contact with a bunch of people who are very supportive of the idea too, some of the representatives further out on the Cape. So we've gotten really good support from most people. Now, myself, Steve Layden, Steve Rafferty have kind of divided up the Cape into different regions, and we've been reaching out to various people who are on the various equivalents of our Water Quality Committee and people who are very knowledgeable about the water quality issues. And we've gotten really strong support from them. Right now, I think it's all systems go from as far as we can see. The bigger challenge will go as we try to seek support outside the Cape and Islands. And so the next steps, we need to talk to the other legislators, and I have hopefully a Zoom meeting being scheduled with Diggs and Flanagan to talk about this. From what I've heard from Dave Bernstein, they were very supportive of the idea. We need to talk to Senator Sear and the other representatives. We need to develop a plan to sort of broaden the outreach, statewide. Again, it's the bigger challenge for those who won't directly receive the benefit of a refundable tax credit. Can they still muster up support behind it? And we're going to continue working with the other select boards. And I haven't talked to Doug recently about that, but if he has any information from, sending these packets out, if he's gotten any feedback, maybe he can talk to that after I'm done. We'll continue working with Representative Vieira and Senator Fernandez to help craft the wording of the bill. They're looking for input. And then finally, whatever other steps the rest of the Water Quality Management Committee has in terms of how we can progress this in a timely manner would be much appreciated. And that's all I have.
Feedback yet. Thank you. Any questions from the committee? Ken?
Not so much a question as a suggestion. Have you talked at all to the Association for Preservation of Cape Cod? They're pretty effective lobbyers.
Yes, that's Andrew Gottlieb, and
Right.
he's
Yes.
totally in favor of it.
Yeah.
I'm sure he's in favor of it if he knows about it, but yeah.
Yeah, Steve, that was part of that sort of Cape-wide outreach, and Steve had that town, and I think you've had really good
Yeah.
conversation with them.
You gave me a list, and I picked all the easy people. Oh, yes.
The one thing I would say we want to emphasize in this effort, I think it's a great start, but speed is of the essence, because the budget process has already begun. Governor has submitted her budget and now goes to House and Senate and all that. And very soon it'll be June, and the budget's supposed to be voted before July 1st. It'd be nice to get this cranked in, because we're on the verge of, and other towns have already implemented IA mandates. And also, I think your data references how it affects IAs. It's not just IAs. We're on the verge of approving funding for another sewer expansion. That septic tax credit, people in their connection cost
Oh,
from their
yeah.
house to the street
We know that.
is part of this. Yes, but I think in trying to publicize this and educate the public and the legislators, it's not just about IAs.
No.
It has a broader reach for sewer connections, and I think that's an important thing. And having Dave Vieira's bill was just a placeholder with no details. He had DOR starting to crunch numbers. Senator Fernandez is a new senator. It might make sense to very early in the process, as you are, to get Senator Sear, who's more experienced in the gyrations of the budget process and the Senate working mechanism. So that's my comments and questions.
Yeah, Vieira, we're been in contact with him. I sent him, potential wording for the bill. Same thing with Senator Fernandez. Haven't heard back on the recent iteration from his staff yet. I mean, he's dealing with lots of problems, but I think we're pushing them pretty hard, but we do need to talk to Sear, so.
Yes, he's a much more experienced in the Senate gyrations, let's call it, for lack of a better term, and a real good, hardworking guy, and he's got good staff. His district director lives in Falmouth, actually.
Okay.
So,
Thank you.
Thanks.
Uncle Holcomb.
All right. The next item is the Advanced Septic System Subsidy Recommendation to present to the Select Board. You've all seen the draft of this. Ken, any comments?
No, not yet.
Have you have this, Kristen, right, to put up on?
Amy's doing it. It's open.
I'm gonna just get my,
Oh, you're right. I do it on one page, it's very tiny. That's
It's
most
much
of it.
smaller, I think we'll have difficulty reading.
Right, that's most of
That's-
it.
Yeah, just missing the top and the bottom line or something.
So the essence of this is that people putting in septics should be treated fairly compared to people who are required to put in sewers. Comments from the committee? Ken?
Why don't you start at the other end?
Oh,
so I
okay.
can think
John?
For a second.
I mean, the only thing that I had a note on was the line, it said, currently, many homeowners will not be eligible for any financial relief at all. But I think most people can apply for these low-interest loans through the Cape Cod Aqua Fund.
Where is this? Which-
It's
which-
the second paragraph, the last sentence. But it's a minor point. I mean, I'm supportive of everything else that's written there.
Yeah, can I comment on that, Steve?
Yeah, this is,
No matter what happens, there'll still be many homeowners. I don't know the actual number, but many homeowners will not be eligible, I guess. I mean, I don't know how it works, so.
I don't think so. I think you can always apply for these low interest, you might not get the 0 to 2%, you might be the 4%, but you can get a below market interest loan
Okay,
through the Aqua Fund, which is,
all right.
which applies towards IAs. I had a conversation with Brian Baumgarten, and if you're in a watershed that's being, an NSA that's being targeted for these upgrades to septic, you will qualify for the Aqua Fund interest rates.
Tom, would you accept striking that second half of the sentence?
Yeah, I mean,
I think the
it's
document's
certainly
still
not a key
powerful as
part.
it sits, and that's why
Yeah.
it's
I'm-
one
I'm
less thing
comfortable
someone
with
can
it.
object to.
I just did what I was told to do here, so.
Does anyone object to striking that second half of that last sentence? All right, let's remove the "and currently." Many homeowners will not be eligible for any financial relief at all. Tom, do you want
No,
to? Okay, you wrote it, so
yeah, I always have second thoughts, but I'm not gonna
I'll
air
come
them
to you in
here.
a second. John?
That's it.
The, in light of that same area, the same thing, the eligibility for the, even under current law, as a non-refundable tax credit, homeowners, a significant majority of them are eligible for the state tax credit of $18,000. And recently, Z. Crocker, Barnstable Clean Water Coalition, in their fall-winter newsletter, They ran some analysis and they estimated 60% of the people in one of their phase plans are eligible for the full state tax credit. So there is a lot of help for people who can qualify under their income for the 18,000. Hopefully, we can get this to be a refundable credit, so all will get it. But in considering how much of a subsidy the town might wish to consider or be able to afford reasonably, understand that roughly half of the cost of an IA, if you say it's $36,000, is eligible for a state tax credit, as long as it is mandated by the Board of Health or some other town entity. If it's a mandated upgrade to your system, you're eligible for the $18,000 state tax credit. And that is important to consider when you look at the potential financial burden of a significant town-funded subsidy. I think that should be part of the statement that there is eligibility for substantial state tax credits.
Is there a specific change you're proposing for this?
That we add a sentence saying, currently, a large number of homeowners would be eligible for a state tax credit of up to $18,000.
But we've just heard that that also applies to the sewers. And the
Sewer
emphasis
hookups.
here is on bringing
Well, yeah.
septic and equity with the sewers.
And that's my point,
If they're both.
that they're both eligible for this. The homeowner connecting to a sewer has to deal with the property disruptions and everything else that's listed in the first paragraph. And they also have to pay the betterment. And we just heard earlier in Amy's presentation, the estimated betterment, and it's only the estimate, it's preliminary stuff, is $40,000. Damn, that's about the cost of an IA. So, I think that there's so many things in flux with making a recommendation to the selectmen. I think they would say, hey, we need more information. This isn't enough. But those are factors that need to be considered in this, if we're gonna make and vote a recommendation. And it should be an included paragraph or a couple of sentences saying eligibility for the state tax credit is significant. Currently, a majority of homeowners would be eligible for an $18,000 state tax credit for IAs, if we want to keep it just to IAs.
Would you like to see a table of costs and benefits for the two systems appended to this?
I don't think, well, we can do that, but we're trying to keep it simple, or do we really want to get into the weeds here?
Tom, do you,
I don't feel strongly one way or the other, I just want it to be factual.
okay.
It says right now, while there are existing programs that might relieve some of the costs,
Yeah, that covers it.
right? I mean, that pretty much covers what you've been talking about, right, Ed?
It does, but I think we're talking about equity between, on one hand, an IA, and on the other hand, a sewer. And the sewer costs, as Amy laid it out, have gone up significantly since the Little Pond project, to the point now of estimating a betterment at 40,000 versus Little Pond, it was 13,000 and change. So the equity between people who are mandated to connect to a sewer and those who are gonna be required to install an IA, those numbers need to be looked at, and maybe a table is the way to go.
Well, historically with the sewers, town meeting has voted a 30% dissolution of that betterment fee, right? That's why I
Well,
got,
what the
that's why I got
betterment-
to 13,000, and so with 40,000, it would be what, 28,000?
No, I think, Amy, she can correct me if I'm wrong, that the 40,000 is the 70% of the cost of the collection system.
It is, oh, okay, that's,
So
Well,
that's what the selectmen will be looking at,
yeah.
and if they go with what has been the standard for the last two projects, 70-30 split, the homeowner, we would be requiring to hook up to a sewer, could be looking at, in the next iteration, Little Pond phase, or Great Pond, phase one, $40,000 betterment cost. Coincidentally, about the estimate for the average IA.
we're not, there's no immediate urgent deadline for this.
Okay.
I like the idea of a table
Okay, yeah.
to focus
I
everybody's
think it makes, the
attention.
more you say that, the more it makes sense.
It could
and-
go along with
Comment.
this. I also like the way it's written now. Ken?
Yeah, I guess the generic nature of the layout of the issue is what I like. The fact that we're not getting too much into numerical specifics.
So you'd prefer not to have a table?
I think it's,
Could have the
I
tables
think
on the
there's a-
second page and you wouldn't have to look at it.
well, okay, but the risk is that your numbers are not accurate if you lay them out.
Steve, my suggestion is we
specifically?
stick with the general, the way Tom has written it. I don't think we need to get into specifics. I think we've made the point to the
Maybe we'll
selectmen.
get some new ideas from Jed. Your hand up first. Yeah, sure.
Sorry, Jack Goldstone, Precinct 2, I'm on the Board of Health. Not necessarily speaking as a Board of Health member. I think a table would be incredibly useful. As much detail succinctly as to what available resources, financial resources exist now would be super helpful to the select board and to town meeting, anybody making any sorts of decisions on this. And also pointing out that we're going to discuss in the next item, the fact that there will be IAs going in that are mandated that will also then be hit with a sewer betterment. So that somebody is going to be paying not only for an IA system, but also the sewer betterment systems. You'll see that in a
Right.
few minutes. So that doesn't necessarily need to be in this letter. I think it's something that you guys need to be aware of. We're aware of that. But I think the more informative, the more specific you can make this, the more useful it is. Having a vague, oh, well, there's money available isn't very helpful because it forces a reader to go and try to do the research themselves. You guys are the expert on this. You have this information. Include it.
Thank you. Yes.
George Topoulos, I'm on the Board of Health, but I'm speaking for myself. I couldn't agree more with what Jed just said. The utility of quantitative information, which is never, almost never presented to the public, cannot be overestimated. You folks have an idea what these sentences mean semi-quantitatively. None of your readers have the slightest idea what they mean quantitatively. So I think Mr. Layton's idea of a table is very important, and that having quantitative information is very important. And I would say that in your table, it ought to say, because of Rule 17 in the Massachusetts legislature, whatever the reason is that a particular subsidy is available to one or the other sewer IA. It's easy to do. You already know what the information is. Put it in here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, just.
And we can have a range to handle
Right,
your objection.
my point is that costs are a moving target.
Yes.
Yes.
And so if you imply that someone's gonna be able to put in their septic system for $40,000 and it's actually $60,000, it's misleading.
So obviously this
So
is-
I just think
yeah.
a lot of caveats have to be built into any now if there's a state, subsidy that has a specific set of criteria, that's different. Yes, of course, that information, the limits on what you can get and all that should go in there.
Okay,
But
so
I'm
so the
talking-
homework is to write up this table, which is Tom and me
I
and
mean,
who else
at
wants to do it.
one point, we were,
Let me
trying to
comment on that.
argue for specific percentages, 70, 30, blah, blah. We don't even know what the selectmen will decide.
Well, I'd like to point out that on the Board of Health has requested from the health agent as accurate a number as we have for the current cost of an IA system, which, there's a little caveat. So we hope to have that number on Monday. So, but, yeah.
Is this quick? Yes. Go ahead.
And it would be important to emphasize to people, there is the hardware costs, which can be known relatively well, and the landscaping, digging,
Oh, yes,
right, that
yes,
is,
we know.
can be anywhere.
Yeah.
And yes, you know, but people may not know.
So those were
And-
my points about the
Yes.
danger of saying.
Right, but you can say what the subsidies are, you can say that, you know, most people are not gonna get that 16,000 or whatever it was total, they're gonna get a lesser amount, if any at all.
Tom?
Let me say that I personally think the point of this letter is like you sending up a flare from a boat that's in trouble. We're saying to the selectmen, there's an inherent disparity in the present approach to these issues, okay? We're not calling the Coast Guard and say, you send 3 boats now, and this is the exact thing, we've got a person that's had a heart condition in the past on the boat. This is a simple note to the Board of Selectmen saying, we see a significant problem here. Look how complicated John's table was, where he just had a couple of examples talking about the refundable tax credit. We'd have a whole full-page table trying to explain the different options and possibilities, and 6 months from now, it would be something different. I want to keep this letter simple, a clear statement to the Board of Selectmen that there's an inherent disparity the way things are set up right now, and let them think about how it might be solved. That's my feeling about the letter, and I want to keep it simple and move it forward.
Doug, which would you prefer to receive?
That's a useful input.
Picking on our poor
Useful
selectmen.
input.
Doug Brown, Select Board, more information's the better. If you guys have time to put a table together, I think it might be helpful. I don't think it's gonna add confusion or distract from the matter. I think you can put that together, but if not, I think the letter's fine too, so.
Thank you. So,
I see the letter just as a first step.
I propose that you and I and anyone else that wants to contact us by email
Yep.
work on some details for next time.
All right.
I'll volunteer.
Okay. Item 5. Oh, yes.
Matt Hanley from Thomas Landis Road. When I speak as a member of the general public, and I agree with the Board of Health. The more information, so we can make this very clear.
We're doing more information, Matt.
Yeah.
You probably want to save your minutes for the next item.
All right, thank you.
The discussion of the Board of Health proposed regulations relative to advanced treatment systems.
Steve, can I sort of start that?
Sure.
We have 2 members of the Board of Health here. This is Jed's 9th draft, which the Board of Health has not seen yet. So they haven't had a chance to comment on it. So I would suggest that any of us who've read it carefully and have specific comments, we could make them directly to Jed, and he could even include them before next Monday's Board of Health meeting. Or we can ask Jed to walk us through this. But I think this is still in the iterative process. I believe the Board of Health is getting closer to being able to go to public hearings, but they're not there yet. So I believe we will have additional chances to make comments, but I think if people have specific comments on this 9th draft, we can pass them to Jed, and
I'd be happy to walk people through it if necessary.
Let's do it.
I think
Yes, you're here. We have the time.
I am going to try to zoom back out again, though, so that everybody, where's the zoom on this?
Can you since you're gonna be going through section by section,
Yep.
maybe magnify?
That's what he's doing.
Yes,
Is that readable for folks?
yes.
Yes,
All right.
that's excellent.
So, what we have done here, we have the purpose and the regulations that provide the authority. I believe we have the full authority to do this, so I'm not going to worry about that. We've defined the best available nitrogen-reducing technology. This is based on the language in Title V, which is 310 CMR 15. And we have specified a total nitrogen performance value of 10 milligrams per liter or less, regardless of whether a system is under full conditional or piloting approval. This is in order to meet the modeling criteria, and also because we do know that there are systems that can do that. So that exist. They are typically right now under conditional approval and piloting approval, but some of that is also, system technologies progress from piloting to conditional to full, depending on how many there are in the ground and how long they've been in the ground. So, nitrogen-sensitive area, so this is more, there's a map, I don't have a map attached to this, but this is about 3/4 of Falmouth is defined in various ways as a nitrogen-sensitive area. That would be those watersheds that that you've delineated. We've put in the District of Critical Planning Concern, which is the part of the watershed immediately abutting Great Sipawisset Marsh. We note here that those areas in public and private water supply protection areas are also considered nitrogen sensitive. That's been in Title V for a long time, actually. And there are already a number of various IA systems in those areas because of that. And then we also added in watershed that are listed under the Clean Water Act Section 303D Integrated Report, which is Herringbrook watershed, which does not have a TMDL, so it's not in the MEP, but we can continue to debate that one. So we will have a website map eventually. It's just some GIS work that hasn't been fully done, but we are then requiring all new construction to incorporate best available nitrogen reduction technology in nitrogen-sensitive areas. So this is the sort of under the premise, if you're in a hole, stop digging. So new construction is new flow, so that's an addition or a new house. So any new flow. Item 3, Section 3 is if you are doing a large reconstruction, and we talked about this before, so that would be a voluntary, non-emergency, substantial improvement, then the cumulative cost of which equals or exceeds 60% of the median assessed value of the properties in the town of Falmouth in the year prior to the date of the initial improvement. This roughly means that if you're adding in the best available nitrogen technology to a septic system, a septic field that's already there, we think the technology cost between itself, we're roughly running about $30,000 in terms of the technology plus the construction of that, addition of that. So I can't remember what that number is, this value comes to, but the addition of $30,000 to that is less than 5% of the total construction cost, is our estimate. And it's indexed to the increase in the value of the property. The item 4 is a requirement for best available nitrogen IA system at the time of property transfer if the septic system has failed. And so here we have property with an assessed value. This is the new language that the Board of Health has not read. With an assessed value of about 140% of the median property value in Falmouth for the previous year. Right now, the median property value in Falmouth last year was $727,000. And so this is approximately $1 million. And if your system has failed, if your house is worth more than $1 million, you must upgrade to an IA system. So this is to try to balance this, since we don't have comprehensive wastewater, we don't have any plans yet. There's not a requirement yet. We know it's coming, but it's not absolutely required. This requires that. This requires inclusion of an IA system. And then there's some technical aspects of failed elements of the system, because previous health agents allowed cesspools to be used as incorporated into otherwise okay Title V systems. This Part B is a complicated way of saying that if you're exempt from a Title V inspection because it's an interfamily or transfer, or if it's a transfer to a family trust, you don't need to incorporate an IA system. So it's, again, an equity issue. This also covers any refinancing. And then, even though we don't anticipate that affordable housing may be maybe $1 million house deed restricted as affordable housing, given the way the property goes. But we're trying not to force affordable housing to upgrade at this point. And here is if the sewer service area has been funded, the design of it has been funded, then we shall not require the installation of an IA system. So we'll just keep an old system until the sewer comes. But it's only if it's been funded, because the timeline of that is about 5 years from funding to construction, based on Amy's description of this. We have credit for installation in a sewered area. If you put an IA system in an area that eventually is sewered, you have 15 years to connect to the sewer. However, and this is the expensive part, you'll still need to pay the betterment charges, because otherwise we can't fund that system if we put a whole bunch of IAs in. If your system fails, you have to connect to the sewer. So 15 years is roughly half the life of a system, as far as we know. And then here is the once there's a watershed permit, this basically says once there's a watershed permit, you have to follow whatever the watershed permit comes to in terms of putting in a IA system. It's all technical language, so hopefully it'll pass. We anticipate discussing this. We will be discussing this on Monday. Our chair's hope is that on Monday we will be able to pass it to town council for review, but depends on the extent of the comments we get tonight and Monday and in between. So.
Thank you, Jed.
Yep.
I like John's idea to not force him to fight it out in 2 different venues. And it's obviously your venue.
The more airing it gets, the more it gets beaten on,
But the
better
more,
it is.
right, the more emails we send you with ideas and so
The more
on.
people hear about it in various venues, the better it becomes.
Can I just ask a question about
Sure.
the last piece?
Yeah.
If you go back to that, if there's a watershed permit, so is that intended, let's say you had a house that that after we do extensive geo-boundaries falls outside the geo-boundary, would not have been required to upgrade. Is that intended to relieve them of the obligation to do that?
Well, the watershed permit will say, we presume that the watershed permit is going to say, these houses are going to be sewered. Right. These are going to require an IA on this time scale.
Right.
If it is not.
And Group C won't be required to do either one.
And Group C will not be required to do either one, unless there is new construction or their system fails.
But I think Ken's point, or at least it would be mine, is why should Group C do it at all if the watershed permit has decided it's not required physically to clean up the estuary?
Because,
Well, my
the
question.
point is that the models that we have do not necessarily assume substantial new construction.
Right,
This
this is
takes
talking
that
about
out.
existing, but
Was that,
this is talking about existing.
well, no, this one is talking about,
7A, I'm just
yeah.
trying.
7A is basically, is the
Trying to figure out what you're
backing
trying to get
for,
at there.
the 7A is the backing for the comprehensive wastewater management plan. Because otherwise, you guys can come up with a plan, but without a regulation
No,
that
I
says
think
it
it's
has to
great,
do. Yeah,
but I'm just trying to understand what the implications of it are.
I think, can I?
So those are those three categories, right? You're gonna be hooked up to the sewer, you're gonna be mandated to upgrade your septic, or you're far enough away and in a distant land.
and you're not rebuilding your house, and it's not,
No, not because you're not rebuilding your house, because the geology in the watershed doesn't need all that nitrogen taken out.
Because
And-
everyone
and
else
look
is
at it
doing
this way.
enough.
Suppose that these other efforts that we've been working on, about where the funding is coming from, involve not just individual homeowners, but they involve the town budget. Why put unnecessary costs on either case? As soon as you have some monetary skin in the game, you begin to see the logic of it.
yeah,
Steve, can I comment?
Yeah.
I mean, I think the whole point of what the Board of Health has been doing is to try and say, and the point that the coalition has been making, that every new construction is adding to the nitrogen load in the watershed. And that the purpose, basic purpose of what they started out was to say, let's not keep digging the hole deeper. Even though we've ascertained at time X now that if we do the watershed permit, that we're gonna meet the TMDL, if there's a lot of additional building, we're still adding nitrogen to that watershed. And we wanna prevent that from happening by,
You're right, and you're still saying nitrogen-sensitive watersheds.
yes.
John,
Right, but
Well,
John had his hand up for it.
what I was gonna say is, because I think this is something I contributed for this document, is that we're gonna have a comprehensive wastewater management plan that's gonna specify which areas are gonna have to go to IA, which will be sewered, and if you're outside of that, then the other triggers will apply, right? You know, if you're doing something that 1 through 6 apply to, that's still gonna cause you to have to go put an IA in. But we want to put some teeth behind what we're doing with the Comprehensive Wastewater Management Plan and having the Board of Health saying that, you know, if you're in this boundary that's defined based on, you know, scientific principles, then you're going to have to upgrade your septic system. And give
Okay,
some
but
teeth behind that
I
mandate.
mean, one thing with the geo boundaries is that we're making, they are scientifically grounded assumptions, but they are assumptions, and they're sophisticated. Some of these 1 through 6, that this category C, they're still in nitrogen-sensitive areas that contribute to the watershed. We don't anticipate, based on the numbers that we're looking at, we're trying to get some more solid numbers. I mean, this may be 50 IA systems or 100 IA systems per year, maybe. And what the comprehensive wastewater plans are gonna call for, like 500, 600 IA systems per year. The town, the Upper Cape, southeastern Massachusetts, does not necessarily have the capacity to build that many IA systems per year. So part of this is also trying to start to ramp up this process of digging holes in the ground and putting expensive technology there. And we just don't, we can't, we couldn't do 500 next year. There's no question about that.
Go ahead.
So, but Jed, when I read that, it doesn't say new construction. It says structures located within nitrogen-sensitive areas subject to blah, blah, blah.
In accordance with the guidelines and time framework delineated by the plan. So
Right,
only what
right.
the plan
So I'm
does.
just looking at it from the point of view of, I happen to be a fortunate individual that I live outside the geo boundary, I'm not doing anything to my house, I'm not increasing flows. Do I have to?
No.
Okay.
Right.
So this
No, unless the
in a
plan-
sense, this protects me from some of the other obligations.
No, this just says you have to follow the plan that the town comes up with. That's the only thing that this says, that the Board of Health, through the power of Title V says that you have to follow the plan. Because otherwise, there isn't any, unless the state comes up.
No, I
Yeah.
hear what you're saying, and I think
Yeah.
that's great. We're getting the additional teeth of
Right.
the Board of Health to back up these recommendations, which is fantastic.
I mean, technically, the question, I mean, we'll have to see, because this may be redundant to Title V, to be honest.
You're basically saying that you recognize that there will also be watershed permits, and in that case, they prevail
Yeah.
over
That's
this.
kind of where the language, usually something like notwithstanding blah, blah, blah above.
Yeah, I mean, we'll have to see, because honestly, Title V, which is superseding to us, which, any of our local regulations are in accordance with Title V, but they're sort of in above toward Title V. Title V says if there's a watershed permit, you have to do what the watershed permit says. So, Commonwealth has the final word there.
Doug?
Hi, Doug Brown, Select Board. Just looking for a little bit more clarification on when this is triggered. From what I'm reading, it seems like everybody in all these embayments that doesn't have a sewer on a budget is gonna have to change their septic? Or is this only triggered by the construction or the failed septic?
So the plan of this is that if you have new construction, then you'd have to put an IA system in. If you have a failed system, you have to upgrade to an IA system if your house is worth above $1 million.
Okay,
And if you tear your house down and rebuild it, then you have to, and you're in one of these areas, you have to put an IA.
but not everybody, it's just those people that fall in those circumstances. Okay,
If you've shown your hand that you have 800,000 in disposable income, then you have to spend 40,000 of it on a new system.
okay, that's what I wanted to clarify.
Yeah, that's what it comes down to, yeah.
And then, if I could just get one more answer as to the geo boundary, I think is like 6,500 houses. But what Jed was mentioning was 75% of the folks in town are in some sort of a watershed. Is it the expectation that we will be only likely doing IAs on those 6,500 that are identified in the geo boundary? Or are we then later on gonna have to go back and say the other 7,000 or whatever it is are also probably gonna have to do something, but maybe at a later date? Is that the reasonable expectation? Or is 6,500 it?
That's a very good question. That's what I was trying to bring up before with my category C. And Jed correctly pointed out that you need a certain allowance for the fact that a brand-new house on a lot that was vacant, or an increased number of bedrooms, is actually increasing the amount of nitrogen. And so there should be some compensation for that.
Well, I'm just saying that
But
on the
the
bigger
details
picture.
of it,
In the bigger picture, we'll know in 40 years.
Well, can I answer, Steve, can I address that question? Because I think if you have a watershed permit, you're doing this every 5 year, you're gonna have to show what your targets are, how you're meeting those targets. And if you're behind, you have to go, to a contingency plan, which is just sewering and IA. And if you don't have enough nitrogen being removed, you may have to consider adding additional homes for IA or sewering, but you're gonna have to get to that number somehow.
Yeah, and when I read the original mandate from DEP, it says that we will address in all watersheds. So that to me means everybody that's in those watersheds. So you've got the geo boundary now, but that's sort of the first phase of implementation, I would think. And then comes the other half.
I propose that we all sit down in quiet places and study this and send our comments to Jed and show up on Monday. Yes.
You spent quite a while talking about the equity issue of people who have to put in a sewer and people who have to put an IA system. And my concern is, what about people in, I guess you're calling it Category C, who don't have to do anything? Seems to me this is a town-wide, statewide, humanity-wide problem. The people in Category C are a certain degree arbitrarily there because they need, the calculation was we need to do this fraction of the houses. That house isn't any more dangerous than that. It doesn't produce any more nitrogen pollution than that one. We just didn't need both of them. We only needed one. That seems incredibly inequitable to me.
I totally agree with you, and that's the strongest argument in favor of a high subsidy for both sewers and IAs, or at least that it be done equally. That way, the entire citizenry, entire set of taxpayers has skin in the game and is solving the problem, even though it's only on a less than 100% of the properties. But not everybody agrees with you on that.
Steve, can I just have, while Amy's here, ask one question? Amy, in 7, we talk about a comprehensive wastewater management plan. There is no more comprehensive wastewater plan. It's just individual watershed plans.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing, that the term should probably be delineated in the watershed management plan for that watershed.
All right, that's an example of the technical thing that should go in an email to Jed, and he's obviously going to accept it. Any other comments?
I just want to say this, because I've spent a lot of hours on this and went to the last Board of Health meeting, and they spent about 2.5 hours talking about this, which I think is incredible dedication by that Board of Health to this whole effort, and they should be commended for that. I think this is real close. This is really good. I think that last statement is a critical one because it puts the onus and the authority for further expansion of IA mandate into a comprehensive plan, or a watershed management plan, not a comprehensive, and it'll be watershed by watershed. I think the important thing that you're expecting by Monday, if I understood you right, Jed, is you're gonna get some numbers, hopefully, from Scott as to where these dollars fall out, because my gut feel is it's a pretty high threshold, and we won't get many IAs this way, but I understand, too, the reticence to try and keep it to, maybe 100 a year. I think it's important as we look at that factor, though, to realize that we're not the only town doing this. There's 1,500 under a mandate on the Vineyard in Tisbury and Oak Bluffs. There's several thousand up in Wellfleet that were just put under a mandate in January of this year. And they have a trigger not only of what you have delineated, but property transfer. Not if it's a property transfer with a failed system, but property transfers, period. Any house sale in Wellfleet, if they're in the area, which is something like 80% of the town, they gotta put an IA in. So they're gonna add to the, let's call it the burden or the problem of who's gonna install and manufacture all these systems. So it's not just Falmouth.
I think Bourne does not have watershed management plans in the, I think they've kind of punted on this, and they said everybody's gonna put in an IA system.
No, I do believe they've recently changed that.
Within 5 years, so I think, which I think is insane. I think that they could buy themselves a lot of time just by coming up with something.
I think they did just come up with, and file for a plan, and state that they are going to do a plan, and their initial IA numbers are small because their watersheds that are impaired are relatively small by comparison. Falmouth's got the big skin in this game, to use Steve's phrase. We got the majority of them by far, but there's a whole Cape Cod and Islands community that's under the same guns, so that's all I got.
Can we move to the next topic?
Number 6.
Number 6. Town Manager's Office recommendation on the draft Water Quality Management Committee mission statement and charge. Discussion and vote. What should we be doing? I want to make a couple, well, first of all, does anybody have, other than fairly technical grammatical corrections to this? I think it's pretty good.
I agree.
At the end of the first paragraph,
Yeah.
there was a word processor error by somebody. I submit that after experience and skills should be simply crossed out. It just doesn't make sense.
Can I change that, Steve?
Yeah.
I think that phrase should come in front of the select board. It should say, in making these appointments, comma, in recruiting and appointing members to this committee, the select board shall seek individuals. That's where it was supposed to
But
be.
it says that's why it's a word processor area. Look, it's there, in making these appointments, the select board shall seek individuals who possess the following knowledge, experience, and skills in recruiting and appointing members to this committee.
Right, so you put that up in front.
But it's there, it's in making these appointments.
But it says shall seek, who possess the, at least in my copy, it just appears once.
It's that, in my copy, it says, in making these appointments, the select board shall seek individuals who possess the following knowledge, experience, and skills, and then there's the bullet points.
Well, the extra then is recruiting, so, I mean, you could drop recruiting.
Anyone else want to comment on that to resolve this?
You could drop "and appointing" in recruiting members to this committee, because you're saying appointments,
Yeah,
Why not just drop the whole thing?
because I think it's important.
To add
In the recruiting of members of the committee, just drop appointing, because you already said appointing in the first part of the sentence.
all right. Who was writing this? You, Tom? Or, this came back to us, right?
This
But who-
came back
select
to
board.
us, so Peter Johnson Staub took
Right,
the
but who
draft.
on this committee started writing it?
no one that
No
I know
one.
of.
So this was the draft that you guys discussed a month or two ago, two
Right.
months ago, that went to town hall. Peter Johnson Staub reworked it to this to match other documents from other committees recently. So this came directly from him, and we have not done anything to it.
Thank you, all
Okay,
right.
Steve, can I?
Yeah, go ahead.
If we
We
just-
agree there's some redundancy there,
Yeah,
right?
I agree,
It's
that's what I'm trying to get rid of. If we just strike in making these appointments and start the sentence with in recruiting and appointing members to this committee, the select board, then we could get around the redundancy.
Yep.
And include.
Yes, I have no problem with that.
Let's do it that way.
That's an easy way.
Okay, so we're striking and making his appointments and beginning the sentence with, in recruiting and appointing members of this committee, the select board shall seek individuals.
Kristen, can you do this now and have it show up on the screen?
Sure.
In big print.
Yeah,
And
much
Kristen-
bigger print.
Kristen, while you're at the screen, could you spell out 7? Yeah. Yeah, thank you.
Alright. So you want. Alright, tell me again what you want.
Go ahead, Tom.
Oh, just take that last phrase, starting with in recruiting, and move the whole thing to the beginning of the sentence, capitalizing in. Right? Strike in making these appointments, yeah. In
Is
recruiting.
everybody happy with that?
Yes, I like it.
Good,
Okay.
print it.
Next trivial thing is at the end of the paragraph that's now at the bottom of the screen, it should be, and on meeting state regulatory requirements. And number 5, I'll give everybody else a chance to go through this too, I'm just getting rid, I think it should be coastal waterways. I've never heard anybody talking about the health of coastal water.
Waters, yeah, is fine. Yeah, that's fine.
All right,
I would call it near.
John, any changes you want?
No, I'm happy with it.
Tom?
Can you
I'm
go?
talking about the whole thing now.
Yeah, no,
where
I was gonna
we
go back to that paragraph, the purpose. This sounds like we're never gonna make it better. So can it say, advise the select board and town manager on maintaining and improving water quality?
I have no problem.
And then strike impaired, because they're not necessarily always gonna be impaired, I hope. And strike the comma at the end of waters. That doesn't have any business there. Good, that's what I would do with that paragraph.
Well, I'm not sure I agree with you on all of those changes, in particular impaired, because that has a very specific meaning with respect to the state mandate regulatory requirements.
It provides the focus of where we're.
Right, exactly.
So-
But,
Well, Steve Rafferty had mentioned that he likes the idea of keeping it general.
Yes.
Why not? In other words,
This limits
the
us.
genius in our job description for Kristen
Well, that's
is
if you-
this clause that says, and any such other matters as may seem appropriate.
So you want
Once you
just-
see that, nothing else matters.
yes,
And
I just think we started with a clear mission, and this makes it vaguer, not clearer. But
But if you insist on leaving impaired in there, then we're not allowed to do anything to prevent a good estuary from becoming worse.
right. That's why I'd like to
Well,
cast
I
a-
don't object to maintaining. I would have wrote it on improving and maintain. First, you got to improve it before you can maintain it.
Unless it's already
No,
healthy.
it might be already.
There aren't that many.
Yeah, but
What do we have? We got 3 healthy estuaries under
Maybe.
the state
Well, we do
requirement.
have several, so.
Yeah, but we don't need to concern ourselves with that. But anyway.
we don't want them to get worse.
Right,
No. I'm not objecting to maintaining, but I think it's sort of a second. The first obligation is to improve the water quality in the systems that are really impaired, and there is a
used coastal waters,
clear designation of what those are in 303D.
but I'm not gonna worry.
Wordsmithing.
And that was the impetus for initially forming this committee,
Right.
clean up the mess.
Right, and the state is mandating now, quite specifically, that we need to develop plans for those, so.
Tom, I was made the mistake of keeping my eyes on my copy instead of looking up there. Has Kristen already put in what you suggested?
Yes, maintaining and improving water quality, she dropped the paragraph, the comma at the end of and, she hasn't,
And how would you change it, Ken?
Well, if you put it back to the way it was,
which is
Wait,
impaired.
don't put it back yet.
Well, it's not that many.
Pretend that it's
just hit
this way.
Control Z. It didn't have maintaining, it just had improving water quality and ecosystem in Falmouth impaired coastal embayments. I think it could be more clearly stated, select board and manager in improving water quality and ecosystem health in Falmouth impaired embayments and coastal waters, and maintaining health in all of, you know what I mean? I would just segregate it
I hear,
into
I
two
think
bits.
it's a matter of taste.
Well,
It
it's-
requires, let's have a simple straw poll. How many people on this board want it the way Tom has, the way it is up there on the screen right now versus Ken's changes?
What is, you mean, with
Yay
the focus
is-
on impaired.
Well, just the way it's written
The
right
way it
now,
is
without
written
impaired.
now versus
Just keeping
changing
it
it
broad and
along.
general,
Yes.
or, yeah, that's fine.
Yeah.
You've taken out any reference to the impaired estuaries. I don't know that there's any state regulatory requirements on healthy systems.
There
Don't have to worry
be.
about state regulations.
There are
They
no
don't have-
state regulations on.
They don't have TMDLs, they don't, you know.
Right.
uh,
It says
All
and,
kinds of town committees that do things that have nothing to do with state regulation.
I understand, but we happen to have that
That's our mission.
mandate. So,
It says, and on meeting state regulatory requirements. I just saw the majority saying, keep it like this.
Yeah,
Okay, let's move on. Anything else?
all right.
Okay, do I hear a motion?
I'll move that we go with what we've got up there right now, top to bottom, the whole thing.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Any further discussion? All in favor? Okay.
I'm
Done.
opposed, just go on the record as saying.
One opposed. Thank you, Kristen.
Yep. Kim, I'll see you tomorrow.
Oh, we're actually running ahead of time.
Maybe.
Let's do the minutes next. Do I have them here? Any,
I move they be accepted as distributed.
Can I understand Steve found a
I'll-
couple typos.
Oh, you got some? I thought you already corrected them before it went out to us.
Well, I don't know. Didn't you find a couple?
I did.
Steve Layton
Oh,
called
I
me with
found-
two minor things.
Yeah, I found two totally minor things.
Right, okay. At the end of section 5, the very, very last two words, significant drawbacks with respect to downstream receptors. It sounds like a neurobiological paper to me.
Okay.
So I would change it to down gradient embayments, with the idea that people don't always know. When we say receptors, that to me sounds almost like a sensory motor.
How about downstream, if you want it for the common people?
Downstream is fine too, because the groundwater is streaming. So downstream embayments. I realized going back and looking at it again, the receptors. And then I'll move that we'll accept them with the changes, right, Steve? You said you saw.
Yeah, did I send you mine?
You left me a voicemail.
Oh, okay, was it clear?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll second.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, reports of members and staff. Ken?
I have no,
Ed?
The hoped-for decision on the Snug Harbor PRB, whether we proceed to the next phase of a full application, we expect that decision on this Friday, the 7th, so fingers crossed. As far as I understand from earlier discussions with the granting authority, they did not feel that any changes in the federal administration would affect these funds because they were already, call it, in the bank. And unless something is changed to freeze those, hopefully we'll get a positive decision on Friday to proceed with a full-scale application for the grant for Snug Harbor PRB.
So in the bank has replaced in the mail?
Well,
The old expression was, well, the
those
check's
were
in the
phrases-
mail.
Those were the phrases that they used.
Yeah, I know,
so
no, that's
They
fine.
did not feel it would be jeopardized by
Yeah,
some of the things that have transpired in the past
No
few weeks. The other thing I would mention, because I think it was, interesting, educational, and important, unless somebody else wants to, is Steve and I and Amy and Dave Buzanowski from the Heights Association had the opportunity to visit the Eversource site on Surf Drive yesterday, and it becomes apparent to us that what they are doing is very, very similar to the hoped-for outfall boring.
Yeah.
So it was a great opportunity for education, for questioning, to see what they had, and just some of the things that struck me in particular is, they're drilling a 30-inch borehole that's almost completed. They've got about 300 feet left to do, and they've pulled the barge due to the impending storm, so it's in safe harbor, so it won't be done this week. But they will then be pulling the HDPE pipe, 18-inch diameter, through that borehole to shore, and then not doing the same thing on the vineyard side. And it's very similar to what we're projecting for the outfall. They're about 85 feet deep as they get out into the sound. And they had a very successful, brief pilot boring, 3 days to go out roughly 3,000 feet into the sound, and then they'll be pulling the bore, enlarging that hole to the 30-inch. What's out there now is a little over 6-inch. So that was encouraging. In 2014, they did the same thing, and it took 57 days to do that, and they ran into a lot of cobble and obstacles and various technical issues. So we would hope that we'd be in the other side towards the 3-day. They are graciously going to share with Amy a lot of the data on test borings they did, similar to what we're going to be doing, hopefully when they fix the darn barge. They said they used the same barge when they did test borings off of Surf Drive. So some very interesting educational and great data that they're going to share with us. I did not know the details, but they're planning on sometime in the next week or so moving the entire operation to the Surf Drive beach parking lot and doing the same thing all over again. And hope to be completed with that no later than early May, and their target is for mid-April, but they're weather dependent. If they run into cobble and other obstacles like they did 10, 11 years ago, all bets are off on how long it'll take, but that's a report.
Thank you. I want to add a couple things to that. One is, well, just second that, it was fascinating technically, and if any of you want your own version of it, or a watered-down version of it, I believe if you contact Eversource, they have a very nice woman who is in charge of community relations, and she will arrange for you to have the same experience there. And I mean, to me as a mechanical engineer and not a civil engineer, it's mind-boggling the fact that they can drill a multi-thousand-foot, 30-inch diameter hole in the ground in sand and mud and inject the right mud with no pipe or casing and have it not collapse.
So that's what they do, they inject a mud to fill.
Yes, but it's just,
Well,
I mean,
drilling
it's the
It's,
envy of
bentonite,
sandcastle
typically.
builders all over the world.
You can buy this, you can buy bentonite.
Big swelling clay.
It's just,
Commercial product.
it's
that
just,
maintains the
it's
hole,
just
and
not
easy
intuitive to me, it's
to
fascinating.
screw through. Yeah, okay.
And-
That's the answer to the question that was percolating in my mind, so
Right.
thanks.
And the other point is that Ed mentioned that in 2014, they were working day and night, and I remember because I used to drive by it, both the lights would be on, you could go there anytime. They were working 24/7, drilling it for several weeks. And this time, they did it in 3 days, in virtually the same place in terms of a distance relative to the distance between bore samples. You know, John pointed out that the bore samples are, what, 500 feet apart?
Yes.
Okay, these two things are less than 500 feet apart. One took 50 days, the other took 3 days. So that tells you something about what you learned from.
There's a lot
bore
of
samples.
variability in the substrate under the seabed.
Heterogeneity.
Yeah.
The other thing that I didn't mention that I found fascinating as an engineer and just curious individual is they've got roughly 3,000 feet continuous fused pipe submerged out in the sound right now. They fused it at Quonset Point in Rhode Island and towed it intact from Quonset Point to Falmouth.
Wow.
In conceptualizing the outfall for Kite Park, Steve Rafferty had the idea we might do the fusing in Worcester Court and in that park and then drag it across the beach and float it from there, but wow, you know, they actually floated a 3,000-foot-long snake, 18-inch diameter from Quonset Point. Absolutely fascinating.
They probably don't do that in the summertime with the recreational boats out there.
So Ed, you said 85 feet deep. Is that sea level or below grade?
Below the seabed.
Below the seabed?
They are 85 feet down in a,
So I
you know,
gotta
it starts
cancel
off
my-
and curves down in the catenary and then comes back up. And
Okay, 'cause-
beyond the eelgrass, they will then do a trench and cover.
Yeah.
They won't be horizontal drilling beyond that. The.
So they're gonna dig a trench that's 85 feet?
No, I don't think the trench goes
No,
that deep.
I doubt if they'll be burying that far. I think the 85 is primarily due to the technology of the boring. You don't want to have it blowing out. You want to be in good, solid, with plenty of weight on top, so that when
Yeah.
you actually are pressurizing this pilot hole with the mud.
Yeah.
So,
And because you can. You've got to drill anyway. You're not going to trench across the road and the beach and all that stuff.
Right.
So once you're drilling, the expense of going down to 85 feet compared to 40 feet is probably almost zero.
Well, the reason I
Because you're
brought,
going this gentle catenary. But then for the bulk of the distance in the middle of the sound, you're in deeper water, so you don't have to worry about people dragging their anchors. So maybe the
funny,
plow puts it 10 feet under or 20 feet under or something.
that makes my next point, because I had already chartered a Chinese tramp steamer to come and drag his anchor midsummer and isolate the vineyard.
The point is, you can only horizontally drill 3,500 feet. That's the limit.
That's the limit.
The limit. And I think there's a misunderstanding. They drill the pilot hole, they then put an auger on the end of it, once it's out there, and attach the pipe. And then they bore back the 18
yeah,
inches.
they pull it back.
They
Maybe,
don't-
yes.
They don't,
They don't
put-
leave it exposed with no
and
pipe
they
inside.
add the bentonite as a lubricant as they're pulling it back in.
I
Well,
think
in
you're
both,
right,
in
yeah.
both directions. When they're doing the pilot, there's bentonite being used. And then when you're reaming it out, I think they referred to it as a reamer, if I remember right.
Yeah.
That they are gonna then expand it and
The
more bentonite.
pressurized bentonite mud system is taking all the cuttings, the material as the bore is cutting through the subsurface soil, the sand and whatnot, and it's all being returned back to the drilling point, right? So you have to
So
get
they've
rid of
gotta
that.
get
Okay,
rid of a lot
this
of
is, this
stuff.
is the after-meeting BS session,
Yeah,
which is fun, but are there any more reports of members and staff?
yes.
Tom?
Amy Lowell gave a super good presentation last week to the Shellfish Advisory Committee, and I participated by adding 2 or 3 points about Jim Churchill's model and the dilution factors and stuff. And there's obviously still a lot of uncertainty, questions, and doubt among the shellfisher community, what the consequences might be. And part of it is a state of flux. Did you get a chance to read Anastasia's stuff she sent today? Okay, on follow-up with the meeting with the Ipswich people? No, I didn't. Okay, anyway, basically, from the shellfishing standpoint, the FDA is moving from what I would call hard data, which is going out and taking water samples and seeing what microorganisms are in it, and taking soft tissue samples from shellfish and seeing what microorganisms are, to relying on hydrodynamic models. And when they ran this model in Ipswich, suddenly all 3 towns, Raleigh, Ipswich, and Newburyport, right, I think were the 3 towns that had to completely shut down their commercial shellfishing because the models showed that there was a problem. And our shellfishing group is concerned that a similar thing might happen here, even if there is no problem. If the model shows there might be a problem, they're worried that the FDA would come in and shut down all the shellfishing over a very large, potentially very large area. So,
But Churchill's data is based on a model.
right, and the FDA is using Churchill's models. That's,
So your point is that they shouldn't have to worry.
I don't think they had to worry. I went in with that idea, and Amy will tell you that right away, they said, well, we don't know. And the other issue is, and I didn't know this until Dale Levitt, who was there, presented on what happened to him in Buzzards Bay when the FDA changed their stuff. It's a totally different situation. But the aquaculture guys are particularly upset because they've got a large investment in fixed assets. And when a big area is shut down, they can't just say, oh, I'm gonna, go dig oysters or clams over here. I'm stuck here and I can't make a living. beyond the 1 to 1,000 dilution, which is what we were saying really Churchill's model shows really great because things are diluted so quickly there. They have a conditional area that extends out to a dilution factor of 1 to 100,000, which is an enormous area under any circumstances. And that's a conditional area, that's not a prohibited area. The 1 to 1,000 dilution includes a prohibited area where you can't do any shellfishing at all. Conditional means on a moment's notice, literally on a moment's notice, it can be shut down. And anyway, so it's much more complicated, at least than I thought before we went, but overall, I thought it was a really good presentation, and they could see where we were going with it. And we're gonna be having more meetings with them.
Steve, can I,
Aren't our commercial beds all in the estuaries? They're in the bays, they're not 3,000 feet out in the sound.
Some years, there's a substantial scallop fishery in that whole strip of eelgrass, which the outfall is immediately outside of. But interestingly enough, the FDA regulations don't require the scallops if all you're harvesting is the adductor, because the microorganisms don't accumulate in the adductor muscle.
Say that again?
John?
I was just gonna add something, not a question on your work, but,
Scallop is, the muscle that,
I've been in contact with Brian Baumgartner, he's the wastewater division
Yeah.
Mass Tech manager. And I was always concerned when I read the Cape Cod Aquafund, website, and it talks about what qualifies for the different percent interest loans. And it specifically said that IA system installations are not eligible for 0 or 2% loans, only the 4%. And I never understood why. And then I started corresponding with Brian. He said, well, that's not written correctly. If you're part of a watershed permit or required by the Mass DEP to install an IA system, you can qualify for a 0 or 2% loan, depending on what your income is. So they have not changed that on the website, but it's another tool. You talk about putting a table together.
no, that stuff would be good to include in the table. I'm just worried about putting a number like, okay, $40,000 for an IA system.
Oh, no, I'm just saying that this is what people see out there. This is a public website,
Right.
and you're looking for funding opportunities, and you're saying, wow, I'm gonna lose some out on this low interest rate because I'm doing an IA, not connecting a sewer, but that's not accurate. What he's saying is they have not updated the site, but all the people in the watershed permits who are required to go to an IA system.
Whose site is this?
Brian, pardon?
It's Brian's?
Well, this is this is the, the Cape Cod Aquafund on the Barnstable County, water quality site. It's where you go to for the information to, if you
So we should
apply for a
alert,
loan.
somebody should tell,
I've told Brian
Barnes-
that.
Brian's aware of it.
He's the manager of this.
okay. Well,
But, why they're not updating it, I don't know, but he said not to worry, you will qualify if you're in a watershed area.
Mandated, and that's a key, if the Board of Health says
Yeah.
thou shalt put in an IA, then you are eligible for the septic tax credit. If they don't mandate it, you are not eligible.
Yeah.
You can put in all the IAs you want.
mandate is-
Falmouth's got about 300 of them right
any
now.
other new and different
Yeah,
reports?
if you're in a watershed permit by the Mass DEP, you'll qualify for the credit. That's
Yeah.
been changed, and that's clear now, that's not an issue.
Mandate has the same status as a failure.
Anything else? To get a magic motion?
I'll move that we adjourn.
Only if you want to, John. Do you want to adjourn?
Absolutely.
All right, I'll second that.
All in favor?
Great.